Today's show was recorded live at the Emerson Resort and Spa on November 8th, 2024. Welcome to Catskills, the Catskills podcast, recording live from the Emerson Resort and Spa in Mount Tremper, New York, where we're getting to know Clayton "Peg-Leg" Bates with our guest Elinor Levy, Folk Arts Program Manager at Arts Mid-Hudson. I'm Brett Barry, and this is Catskills. Welcome to the show. The story of Peg-Leg Bates might have started just over 100 years ago when Clayton Bates lost a leg in a farming accident. But the Catskills angle started earlier this year when our neighbors Kathleen and Boyd joined us for an interpretive tour of the Amistad, which was docked at the Rondout. Driving back home, we passed a sign on Route 209 that we've probably all passed many times, and it reads, Peg-Leg Bates Memorial Highway. And Kathleen said something like,
"Hey, who's that?"
And honestly, I used to wonder who this woman, Peg, was. And I'm sure I looked it up a while back, but I couldn't remember. So the research began, and it's not a woman, it's a man. And his name is Clayton. Clayton Peg-Leg Bates. And so I started researching on my phone in Kathleen and Boyd's car. Here's what I found. Born October 11th, 1907 in a small South Carolina town, Clayton Bates took to dancing at age 5 and lost a leg at age 12 in a cotton gin. 3 years later, his uncle fashioned him a peg leg, and then Peg-Leg Bates launched his career on the black vaudeville circuit. By 20, he was on Broadway with what the New York Times called an energetic blend of soft shoe, tap, and jitterbug. In fact, he would become one of the greatest tap dancers of all time. The Ed Sullivan Show featured him at least 21 times. Here's a clip.
Now here is dancing star Peg-Leg Bates. So let's welcome him back warmly with a really big hand.
Arts Mid-Hudson in Poughkeepsie recently hosted the exhibit Peg-Leg Bates, The Performance Years, and Elinor Levy was at the helm of that show. Elinor, welcome to Catskills.
Thank you.
How did you come to discover Peg-Leg Bates?
Well, I first have to say I grew up in Oakland, California, so I knew nothing. All I knew of the Catskills was, of course, Dirty Dancing. And I did, although I did go to another resort once for a conference, and I certainly didn't know about Peg-Leg Bates. I started work at Arts Mid-Hudson in 2016, and in September 2016, and about a month or so later, I met Jeff Miller, who is the Ulster County historian. And once we got to know each other, and he sort of got to know my work, he came to me and he said, look, there's this person I've really wanted to research and study, but I just don't know how to go about it, how to get started. And like, okay. He said, it's a man named Clayton Peg-Leg Bates, who is a one-legged African-American tap dancer, and that's all he had to say to me, and I was in. And he had actually met Peg-Leg Bates. Jeff had been a teacher in the school district around Kingston, so he had first encountered Peg-Leg Bates during one of the shows that Peg-Leg Bates would do in the schools. And that sort of sparked his interest, and that kept going. And once he told me about him, and I did some more research, I was like, we have to. And of course, I had no idea that there was anything, I didn't know there was anything but Jewish resorts up here in the Catskills. So it was first like finding out there were not Jewish resorts, and then that there was this African-American interracial resort. It was really mind-boggling to me. And it took us a couple more years to sort of get going, and ultimately I was able to raise some money, and we were able to do the project, which took about 2 years, and really isn't done yet.
Can you explain the exhibit and who else was involved in that project?
We were very so the other sort of impetus for the project is that we had an architectural student and I can't remember her name offhand, unfortunately, who contacted us, who was at Ithaca at Cornell. And she was doing some work on vernacular architecture, which is architecture that you find in local communities. It's built according to local traditions. And she had found out about the Peg Leg Bates Resort and wanted to actually go and measure the buildings, which is what vernacular architects do, and couldn't get access. And so she found Jeff, and then Jeff put me in touch with her, and we all sort of gathered together. Unfortunately, we were never able to gain access to the property, although the property itself is really interesting. I'd love to talk about that. And then Dave Davidson came in. Dave Davidson of Hudson West Productions made the documentary called Dancing Man that actually we got to see last week at the Borscht Belt Film Festival about Peg Leg Bates, and had known Peg Leg Bates sort of towards the end of his life. And that sort of got the ball rolling. And Jeff and I talked. To be honest, we had some concerns of two nice Jewish white people doing this work on Peg Leg Bates, but talked it over with the Black community in Kingston, who was deep into the African burial ground that was found there, and they said, "We trust you." So we went on to do this work. I was able to bring in some interns, and the true product is the webpage. If you go to artsmidhudson.org and go to the folk arts page, you can link to the webpage about Peg Leg Bates. But I also was able to access many of the posters that featured him in the shows that he did around the world. And so that's what we did for the exhibit. We had copies of the posters. He actually performed with the Harlem Globetrotters, among other people. He performed in Australia. He performed before royalty in England. I mean, he really made it, lots and lots of places before coming home to the U.S.
I read that he performed for the King and Queen in 1952.
Yes. Yeah. So that would have been around the beginning of Elizabeth's reign.
You mentioned Dave Davidson, who produced a documentary called The Dancing Man, and he gave us permission to use this clip from his film, so I'm going to play that now.
Don't look at me in sympathy. I'm glad that I'm this way. For I feel good and I'm knocking on wood as long as I can sing. I mix light fantastics up with hot gymnastics. I'm Peg Leg Bates, the one-leg dancing man.
So what does that say about the man? He lost a leg and decided, I'm going to dance.
It's pretty amazing. And for those of you who are going to listen to this later and can't see what happened, you can go to the webpage and see the clip. But his signature move was actually landing on the peg leg, and which was really hard on his leg, hard on that leg. And he, no two-legged tap dancer can emulate what he does because of the particular syncopation of, the tapping with the foot and then with the peg leg. Although there is a one-legged tap dancer, Evan Ruggiero, who dances now, known as Lord Peg Leg, but it was the other leg. And I don't even think he's tried to replicate that move. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Evan. But it says, it's so much about resilience that he didn't want to give up. And in a sense, proving to his mother, because he was born to sharecroppers, and he really wanted to bring in money and work in the cotton gin. And his mother said, no, no, no. And she prayed on it, and she said yes, which of course she immediately regretted when he lost his leg, which, by the way, they operated on the kitchen table, because of course he wasn't allowed in a hospital. And I think just from that early age, he's like, I'm going to make something of myself. I'm going to do what I need to do. And he did. And not only did he perform around the country, he also, it was really hard on Black performers then. There was a specific booking agent that they could use. And of course, the green laws were in effect about where they could stay. And Black performers were not only not paid as well as white performers, they were often scammed out of their money. And he was scammed, I think, twice, and made a decision that wasn't going to happen. He had to, at least once he had to call his mother for money, and he was like, I can't do that again. And she said, you can't do that again. So he really figured out how to save money. And he was a shrewd business person on top of that. In a time, still today, we hear that it's hard for people of color in the music industry to get fair pay. And certainly back then it was a lot harder than that. And where they could stay. I think they were probably treated better in Europe and around the world than they were in their own home country. The places they could stay, where they could perform, was always up for grabs. And, having to leave town fast if necessary. And one of the most significant things to me that I'm still trying to research, and having not a lot of luck, is he went to perform in Washington, D.C., but Blacks were not allowed to perform on the stage, so he had to wear blackface to cover the fact that he was Black on a stage in Washington, D.C., which of course this week feels very significant. So again, if anybody has more information about that, please let me know, because we're dying to get a little more to the bottom of that.
That's amazing. I read that he had performed in blackface, and I was scratching my head on that one. So
yeah, it was because he wasn't allowed on the stages. So
talk a little bit about how he was a pioneer in other ways, either for Black entertainers or disabled entertainers, or just as a Black businessman in that time period.
Well, I think certainly for Black entertainers, and him taking control of his finances in that way, and making sure that, he didn't get rooked a second or third time, which was kind of significant. And he was a pretty strong character, and certainly there weren't many disabled entertainers at that time at all, let alone a one-legged tap dancer. So that was pretty significant in itself. And then the decision to be an entrepreneur, and the story that goes with that is that he was performing at Grossinger's, and he was standing with another Black performer, or his brother, or brother-in-law, I can't quite remember that part, but he looks out of the audience and he turns to me and says, where are we? Basically, where are we in this? And they weren't. There was Father Divine, who's another character in this area, did have some sort of resort, but it's a little hazy on exactly what that was. And he decided Peg Leg Bates decided he wanted to open an interracial resort where anyone could come. And what's interesting is he opened this resort in what used to be a chicken farm or a turkey farm. And they renovated the buildings into cabins and things like that where people could stay. And at that point, he was already performing in the schools for the children. And they would go home and tell mom and dad. And then the next thing you know, there would be carpenters and electricians and plumbers showing up the site saying, what can we do? How can we get this off the ground? And so, he already, I think not just a good businessman, but he was a communitarian. That was his true cachet, is that he wanted to give back to the community in any way that he could. So he performed in the schools as fundraisers. He would perform for veterans groups. He would talk with people who had disabilities or even suffering from some sort of addiction and say, if I can do it, you can do it. And I think that's the true attitude. And his just what appears to be a completely sunny nature, that he was always able to look at the positive side, and the ability to offer people this space. There were 3 ways to stay at the resort. You could come up for the week and stay all week, and apparently the food was really good. And you could come up for like a weekend. But I think the most significant thing, which did happen at some of the other resorts, is that dozens of buses would leave New York, I think Philadelphia, on Saturday and Sunday morning, and you would come up for the day. And for a small fee, you had the run of the place. I think there was trail rides, and I don't think there were horses, but there was bikes, and there was hiking, and the pool, and people would party on the bus all the way up, and they would come out with their big coolers of food and stuff, and Peg Leg would come up in like his golf cart, and the women would line up. He was also very, very handsome, as you can see, and very, very confident, and the women would just line up to get pictures taken with him. And then at the end of the day, at like 5:30, he would do a floor show, and then they would get back on the buses and go back to the city. And I think that's incredibly significant, that you could find a way for one day to be up in this beautiful area and get to meet and see Peg Leg Bates perform.
You mentioned the Grossingers. Did the Borscht Belt inspire him to create this resort for the Black community?
I think so. I think it was very much that, in the same way that the Jewish resorts came up. And there were also Latino resorts too, Italian, Latino, and Irish. And one of the ways you knew what type of resort it was and whether you were welcome, especially if you were not Christian, was if the sign said Sunday services, you knew that wasn't the resort for you. That, very subtle, but you knew it wasn't for you, and you would go to one of the, Grossingers or one of the other ones, which I thought was very interesting, sort of how to figure out where you belonged.
So let's talk about his resort a little bit more. He established it in 1951 in Kerhonkson, right here in the Catskills. And at the Peg Leg Bates Country Club, guests were told, "You will not be robbed, you will not be mugged." And signs were posted, and they warned, "We have karate experts on the premises."
I don't think they did, but it was a safe place. It was a safe place, and not just for people from New York City, because during the off season, he and the band and Miss Renee Bailey would travel down south to drum up business. So people came from all over because it was a safe place to be, and there just weren't that many of them for the Black community. And then there was the nightclub, and it went through a number of name changes because every time he tried to settle on a name, you can't use resort, you can't use casino, you can't use this, you can't use that. You could just come up for the night and just go to the nightclub. And it was really great because it was another place you never knew who was going to be there, who might show up, because he knew everyone, and people would come up from the city and perform, sort of off the cuff.
The resort had a swimming pool, a roller disco rink, all-you-can-eat buffets, a bike path, the Broadway floor show. They got to hobnob with Peg Leg himself, and he would come out theatrically on Saturday, I think, Saturday morning. The guests would anticipate this. So, it's kind of nice that interesting the Catskills have long welcomed visitors seeking respite in one way or another. The Borscht Belt and, as you said, the Latino resorts and this first Black resort of the Catskills. Maybe the only one, I don't know.
It wasn't the only one, but it was certainly the one that was most famous.
Did you get to meet guests or employees of that resort in your research, and what were some of the stories that came out of that?
Well, it was really funny because I was doing this research, and I was actually I'm trying to remember where we were. Oh, we were on our way to Syracuse, I think, for a meeting. Every year, the folklorists in New York, we get together for what we call the round table, and I was on the train, and I knew there were 2 other women on the train from New York, Varitha Reddy and Sandra, I can't remember Sandra's last name. who are African American, and I went back to chat with them, and they said, "Oh, what are you working on these days?" At Peg Leg Bakes, and Baritha said, "Oh, I spent a summer working there," and so it was her second job ever, and she had seen an advertisement. She was living in one of the boroughs, and she'd seen an advertisement, and she came up for at least one summer, lived in one of the cabins, and worked at the resort. And she said it was a lot of fun, to work the resort. I think he was a good employer. And so a lot of young Black people did come up to work at the resort during the summer.
And not only was it a safe place for Black people, but it was also a place where they could escape the city heat. And it was, for many people, their first experience, enjoying nature and seeing trees like that.
Probably, yeah.
According to some of the reports I read.
The guests, I've met guests, mostly who've been locals who stayed. And, would go up for the day or go up for an evening at the nightclub. And they said it was just fun. It was a lot of fun. And he was such a consummate performer. And the music was always good. And Miss Renee was his singer for over 20 years. And her voice, I'm sorry she couldn't be here tonight. Her voice is still as powerful as it was then. I sort of joke that she sits down to sing now, which a lot of people don't do, but you would never, her voice is as powerful sitting as mine will ever be standing. And, she tells some wonderful stories about being with him and about traveling with him, what it was like to travel under the Green Book in the South, even with this extremely famous person. And his involvement in the community, I think the other thing that's so important is that he gave back to the community by doing these charity events where he would raise money. But also there's the Sampsonville Methodist United Church, which is just a little church up the street, tiny little church. And maybe we'll talk about it more, but he would let the ladies sell crocheted items and other things at the resort to raise money for the church and to build their social hall, which is bigger than the church itself. And I did have a wonderful Sunday afternoon after church with some of the church members about 2-3 years ago, where they sat and told us stories and showed me pictures because they really took him in. And one of the last pictures of him alive is actually at his birthday party with a cake, wonderful cake in front of him. But he really supported the church. Miss Renee was also their choir leader. And on Sundays, my understanding is that he would go to church. And anyone who was at the resort was welcome to come with him. So this little church during the season was probably full to the brim. And Miss Renee recalls she knew exactly when he entered, and she knew exactly when he was ready to start singing because his voice was so crystal clear. And I love that about who he was and how he related to people.
We actually have someone in the audience who has a firsthand experience with Peg Leg Bates. And Purdy Halstead tells me that Peg Leg was at his wedding. So Purdy, can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yes, he was at the wedding. I'm a member of that church in Sampsonville, married there and everything. And Renee Bailey is a member also. So I'd sing in the choir too with Renee. But we moved up in 2001. And Peg wasn't as active in the church at that time. But he donated things. He donated the organ, a Baldwin organ for the church. He donated a carpet for the church. The carpet has since worn out. We've had to replace it. But he donated those things. I remember also, I worked for the state, and I was at SUNY New Paltz. There was some sort of they had tables, and he had I don't know if it was a transportation bond issue or something. And I was supposed to be representing the state. And on the other side of the curtain, there was a seminar going on, and I heard Peg Leg Bates' voice. I poked my head around, and I was talking to the students at SUNY New Paltz. So when I had a break in the action, I went over and introduced myself and said he was there for, I don't know if it was inclusion or something, but he was active in the community as well, not just in the local community, but through SUNY New Paltz. One time the church had some financial difficulties and say, I'll do a benefit. So we did a benefit at the Peg Leg Bates Country Club. The proceeds went to help offset the expenses of the church. He was very active in the community.
How did he come to be at your wedding, Purdy?
He was active in the church. My wife's parents knew him, were active in that church. And they said, well, when we're inviting people to the wedding, let's invite Peg Leg Bates. And some of them came. It was good.
Did he perform, or was he just there to enjoy?
He just enjoyed. Yeah. He was at that stage in his life when enjoying was good.
What year was that, Purdy?
1964. I can remember in 1963, I think, or 62, they had the benefit. I can remember buses coming up with people going to the country club and going back after the weekend. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. So the resort closes in 1987. The dwindling crowd attributed to a very good problem, integration. Blacks and whites vacationing in the same resorts. There wasn't quite the need for a black resort. So what happened to the property, Elinor?
He actually, it was after his wife Alice passed away, because she was really the business side of the equation. I think he lost a little bit of interest, a little bit of oomph, because Alice was gone. And he did sell it to another couple. I think they were Jamaican, and they tried to run it and it didn't quite work. And I think he took it back for a little while. Then ultimately it was sold to a woman who unfortunately was killed on the property during Hurricane Sandy when a tree fell on her. Oh, wow. Then I think it lay fallow for a long, long time. Most recently, it's been bought by someone who is supposed to be opening some sort of equestrian center, and we don't know the state of that because I was going up there every 6 months or so. I never went on the property because that's trespassing, and I didn't want to do that. We did fly a drone over it. Stephen Blauweis and his wife, Karen Berlowitz, did, because I found out legally you can fly a drone over. Unfortunately, it was a really sunny day, so we didn't get a lot. But it's pretty dilapidated, and I don't know whether this woman was waiting for everything just to fall in. I know that when I started doing this work, I just happened to meet a tap dancer named Joel Hanna, who used to dance with, I can't remember, the group up here.
Oh,
Yeah.
Caravan.
Vandenberg Caravan, that's
yes.
it. And I just happened to be at a performance they were doing, and he was dancing, and I went up after and said, look, I'm doing this work on Peg Leg Bates. And he's like, what are you doing? Let's get this. And we had hoped to put together some sort of tap dance extravaganza, but he really wanted to see if he could buy the property back. And a number of other tap dancers really would like to purchase the property if they could and bring it to some sort of life as a dance center or something. That unfortunately hasn't happened. And then as things happen with research, I moved on. But more recently, I was giving a talk at the Ellenville Library, and I met a woman named Tanya Williams, who's from the city. She's a retired police officer. And she has a building in Kerhonkson that it was either her father or her uncle's tavern. And she's been talking to me for the past year about wanting to open a Peg Leg Bates museum up here. There's a small one down in Fountain Hill where South Carolina, that she really wants to open that, and maybe alongside with a community center. So, I've been trying to put her in touch with people. And last night I was like, I forgot about Joel. And so I put them in touch with each other today, because after the resort closed and Alice passed away, he did a lot of work in the city with tap dancing, with performances and things, working with Amy Mann and Toes Taranoff, who did give us an interview, and doing performances like that well into, before he passed away.
He retired, so to speak, from show business in 1989, but continued to perform for audiences of children, the elderly, the disabled, and advocating.
Advocating that you can do anything you put your mind to.
Yeah.
Which is just amazing. And one of my favorite stories that I heard from one of the gentlemen from at the church was actually, it's like a secondhand story, but he had a friend whose father lost his leg in, I believe, World War II, or maybe a little late in Korea or Vietnam. And Peg Leg would go visit him. And this young man, the son would sit on the steps and he would listen to the two men talk, and then they would get up and dance. And that's the vision I always think of, of him, of Peg Leg Bates and this other gentleman, each with their one leg and their peg legs, dancing, And the other story I love is he did try a prosthetic leg, and he wore it during a tour in Europe. I don't think he wore it dancing. And when he came home, and this, of course, is when you still took a ship to Europe and back, he got off the boat and he was wearing the prosthetic leg, and he walked right past his mother. His mother didn't recognize him.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, nope, got to go back and wear the peg leg again. Another great story is he, of course, knew like Jerry Lewis and that whole crowd. And at one time, Jerry Lewis noticed he only had one peg leg. Or maybe two, maybe a backup. And so he talked to at least Melody. Melody told me the story, his daughter. And that they somehow were able to get get one of the legs. And Jerry Lewis had 5 more made for him. I mean, that's the type of man he was that you wanted to do these things for. And I think the respect that he commanded, was on par with Sammy Davis Jr.
Peg Leg died in 1998, and 2 years later, Governor George Pataki signed into law a bill, the renaming of a 35-mile stretch of U.S. Route 209 in Ulster County, the Peg Leg Bates Memorial Highway. So I think we've come full circle. I hope that answered your question, Kathleen, on who Peg Leg Bates is. I had to go through all of this just to satisfy that.
Right.
Elinor, can we open this up for some Q&A?
Absolutely.
Great. If anyone has a question, raise your hand, and Olivia will come over with a microphone.
My question is, he had this prosthetic leg. Did he have the same prosthetic leg throughout his entire lifetime? Because it looks very primitive. And he's been dancing, into the 60s and 70s, correct?
His first peg leg was made by his uncle, but as he, grew and aged, and this is not my understanding of him, but sort of my understanding of people who've lost limbs, the shape changes. And of course, because he was dancing, there were times when he would leave a dent in the floor. So I think there had to be a continuing shift of peg legs, but I think that's the style he just preferred. That was the easiest for him to dance in.
It worked for him.
It worked for him.
And when he talked about a prosthetic leg, it wouldn't have the same effect acoustically.
No.
He knew how to work that.
Yeah, I don't think he could dance, and I think he just thought he might wear it around town, sort of thing. And but realized that wasn't him.
But dancing, it had like a percussive quality that he knew how to capture that and harmonize with the other foot.
Right, exactly, in a way that no one, two-legged tap dancers cannot replicate.
Yeah.
And I don't think even Evan Ruggiero has managed to capture quite that.
Did he give himself the name of Peg Leg Bates, or was that, as an entertainer, was that?
I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Because I
wouldn't be surprised. I could say 50-50 he gave it to himself, and 50-50 that was the gimmick that was used. Who's not going to hire a one-legged?
Right. Because I only ever knew him as, I didn't even know his first name, and I passed by that sign all the time, and Clayton just kind of, just never. It was always just Peg Leg Bates. That was his name.
Yeah, I'll have to ask Miss Renee if she knows the next time I talk with her.
Yeah, it's interesting because Miss Renee, I actually met her. She sang at the funeral of my best friend in Olive Bridge, and so she has this amazing voice, just an amazing voice.
We'll put a link in the show notes to Miss Renee Bailey.
Yeah, and she does have a CD out. with a variety of songs on it that she did a couple of years ago. I had the opportunity to sit down and do a Zoom with her, and I brought in a young singer, Rose Maria Reynoso, who's a Taino Dominican Republic singer. Check her out; she's amazing. And I had her do the interview because I really loved the old and the new. And at one point, they didn't sing together, which was sad, but they sang for each other. It was really beautiful to hear her and to have a young singer interview her. Like, this is what I want. How did you get here? It was really wonderful.
I came in a little late. I just want to know, you said something about the family working in some crops.
His father was pretty absent. His mother was a sharecropper.
And they were not New Yorkers?
No, they were in South Carolina, Fountain Hills, South Carolina.
And how did they then finally settle here?
Well, he settled here.
He settled.
He settled here, I'm sure came up with, because he performed in the Catskills and, of course, performed in New York many times. And I think between that, was looking for land, and this was the land he could afford.
And Miss Renee, how old is she now?
I think she's 90-something.
Yeah, I saw her at that church
Yeah.
about 5 years ago, and I didn't realize who she was. Now that you say it, I realize now who she was in conjunction with. Thank you very much.
We tried to get Ms. Renee here tonight, but her health wouldn't allow it.
Oh, I'm sorry. So Miss Renee was his lead singer for about 20 years at the resort. Well, and with the band when they toured. And after that, she then, when she sings around here, she often sings with the Saints of Swing, which is a band led by David Winograd. And David, I want to say a shout out to David Winograd, who was also a tremendous help because he knew Peg Leg Bates and he's a musician in doing the research as well and getting us people. And it was amazing. Anybody I met, what are you working on? Peg Leg Bates. Oh, I know this person. I know that person. Or my uncle did this. And sort of tracking some of those things down has been kind of fascinating.
So I just want to clarify again. So Miss Renee met Peg Leg here in the
Yes,
here in the
she moved up
Catskills.
here with her husband to work, and he heard her sing. And sort of the story goes, he brought her in to sing for a night. And he goes, well, why don't you come back next week? And he did that a couple of times. And they finally said, why don't you just stay? And
So
sing?
she was part of the band that was part of the resort.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, I see. She didn't tour with him.
She did.
Oh, and then she actually went on the road with him as
And
well.
yeah, when they went so once the season closed, they would go on the road down south to drum up business. And, she talked about that and what it was like to tour under the Green Book laws and Jim Crow, and how they would modify what they sang for the audience. They would really sort of riff off the audience.
Great. I hope we'll hear a little of her singing in this podcast.
Well, now I have to make that happen.
Did he have children?
Yes, he had one daughter, Melody, who worked at the resort I believe in the souvenir shop. Melody actually lives next door to where the resort was, and the house was given to her by Mom's Mabley as, I believe, a wedding present for her in Preston. Yeah.
So he had his own orchestra?
Yes, he did.
And was it a large orchestra? I mean,
It doesn't look to have been a large orchestra when you look at the stage. I mean, or probably band is a better representation. It probably had the usual with drummer, piano, bass, guitar.
right.
know.
And they traveled with him.
And they traveled with him.
Okay, thank you.
Has there been any biography written of him?
There is a children's book.
It's called Knocking on Wood, I think.
Yeah, Knocking on Wood. And it's it's actually a really nice book. I don't know. There's so much information out there on websites and stuff. A book just about him would be kind of short, but I think placing him within the context of the civil rights movement and Black entrepreneurship would be interesting. And there's at least one story about not just the civil rights movement and people coming up here, but he also was very aware that once once blacks and people of color could go anywhere they wanted, that it was going to end. And it was sort of a bittersweet ending. When we opened the exhibit, there's these two wonderful people who I will give a shout out to in Kingston who run Seasoned Delicious, a really wonderful Jamaican restaurant, and they own Seasons Giving. They run Seasons Giving, which is a charitable organization. But Tamika and Martinique Dunkley, they also run the Caribbean Festival every year, but they are training Black entrepreneurs. That's their goal. So I had them come and talk about the importance of Black entrepreneurship in the context of peg leg baits. So I think that's where a really good discussion can happen, is what happened to Black entrepreneurship post-civil rights, which unfortunately led to the demise of Black entrepreneurship, because you could suddenly go and shop anywhere.
Is that discussion available?
I don't think we taped it. I don't remember.
But there are quite a few others that are available on the site.
Right.
Can you tell us what that site is?
Oh, the site. So if you go to artsmidhudson.org and then follow to the folklore page, you'll find a link to the Peg Leg Baits Project, among some other things that we do at Arts Mid-Hudson in the folk arts program. But also you can access Martinique and Tamika through Seasons Giving, because they continue to do projects around, they do one every year called Circulation of the Black Dollar, which circulates faster within a community than other dollars do. And so I see them as sort of continuing work. They're not entertainers necessarily, but they're doing this work that he started in entrepreneurship.
Nice.
So you mentioned the Ed Sullivan performances. Was he also in films?
He did. He played a pirate. I can't remember the name of the film, but he played a pirate in a film and danced and sang. So yeah, he did a little bit of film. But I think being on the Ed Sullivan Show, I think he's the performer who was on the Ed Sullivan Show the most, more than 21 times.
I was going to ask about, you were talking about entrepreneurship. I would think all of this would be very expensive to start a resort and to pay for a band and the singers. And did he have investors, or because you said they also weren't making a lot of money on the circuit?
I think he saved up, and I think the land was cheap because it had been a turkey farm. And I think there was the minute they opened, people were coming up. And it wasn't that expensive as far as we could tell. The Borscht Belt Museum actually has a brochure of and how much it costs. And so I think most of the money was his. I don't think he had any investors. The other thing we're searching for, in addition to trying to find out more about these performances in Washington, D.C., is we haven't been able to find the business records for the resort. And we really would love to access them somehow. So again, anyone out there who knows someone who knows someone, we'd like to see the guest book and those things.
And did you research maybe the daughter would have the financial records?
We've asked, and she hasn't gotten back to us. So I think they probably passed on to the next business owners.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Elinor, Levy, so much. Thank you all for joining us for Catscast's special live recording of our tribute to Clayton Peg Leg Baits. Many thanks to Elinor Levy from Arts Mid-Hudson, and thanks to the Emerson Resort and Spa for hosting us. Our production assistant is Olivia Sipple. Catscast is a bi-weekly production of Silver Hollow Audio. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To search the entire archive or to get in touch, please visit catscast.com. I'm Brett Barry. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Catscast is supported by the Mountain Eagle, covering Delaware, Greene, and Schoharie counties, including brands for the local region such as the Wyndham Weekly, Schoharie News, Cobleskill Herald, and Catskills Chronicle. For more information, call 518-763-6854 or email mountaineaglenews@gmail.com. And by Briars and Brambles Books, the go-to independent book and gift store in the Catskills. Located in Windham, New York, right next to the pharmacy, just steps away from the Windham Path. Open daily. For more information, visit briersandbramblesbooks.com or call 518-750-8599.